My name is Lila Hart. I'm 24 years old. The day my uncle's lawyer read the will, I realized my family loved money more than they loved each other. I'd always kind of suspected it, but sitting in that mahogany-paneled conference room, watching everyone lean forward like predators waiting for a wounded animal to stumble, removed any doubt I had left. My uncle left his entire fortune to whoever can solve his riddle, I remember thinking, so of course my family turned savage. Uncle Harrison was the black sheep who'd gone off script in the 70s and somehow landed on his feet. While my dad and his brothers followed respectable paths, Dad became an insurance adjuster, Uncle Brad sold real estate, Uncle Mike did construction. Harrison dropped out of college in 1979 to write software for companies that barely knew what a computer was. He's living in a fantasy, my grandfather used to grumble at Sunday dinners, stabbing his fork into overcooked roast. Programming isn't a real job. By 1985, Harrison was consulting for Fortune 500 companies. By 1990, he'd sold his first software company for $3 million. By 2000, he'd sold two more for amounts so obscene even the newspaper wouldn't print them. The family went from mocking him to pretending not to care about his success, which is worse in its own way. The thing is, he'd tried to share it. When my cousin Derek dropped out of MIT, Harrison offered to pay for his education anyway, or give him a job in one of his companies. When my dad lost his job in 2008, Harrison quietly wired them a down payment for this house they still brag about saving up for. He paid medical bills for relatives without ever telling anyone it was him. He did it all discreetly, like generosity was something you should be embarrassed about. But money made him lonely. I learned that 6 months before he died, during our last conversation. He'd called to congratulate me on graduating college, and somehow we ended up talking for 3 hours about everything except my degree. "Do you know why I never married?" he asked suddenly. "You never met the right person?" I guessed. He laughed softly. "I met several right people. I could just never tell if they loved me or loved what I could buy them." His voice went quiet, tired. "Money changes everything, kiddo, even when people don't mean for it to." He died at 67. Heart failure, the doctor said. I think it was more complicated than that. We all expected the traditional script. Split the money, sell the house, keep the cars, fight over the furniture, move on. Instead, his lawyer, thin, pale, eyes that gave nothing away, unfolded the will and began with a line that made everyone sit up straighter. "To my greedy relatives who only visit during holidays," he read, "I leave my entire $47 million fortune to whichever of you can solve the riddle hidden in my study. You have 30 days. If no one succeeds, everything goes to charity." The room erupted. My father immediately started barking orders, his voice cutting through the chaos like a drill sergeant. "We'll search systematically. No one moves anything without telling me. We work as a team." Mom pulled out her phone, thumbs already flying. "I'm looking up puzzle-solving strategies and cipher types. This has to be code-based." He was a programmer. My cousin Derek, who had once been MIT's pride and our family's bragging point before dropping out and drifting, straightened in his chair, suddenly important again. "It's obviously something logical," he said, like the money was already halfway in his account. "This is insane," Aunt Linda muttered under her breath. "We should contest it." "The will is ironclad," the lawyer said calmly. "Mr. Harrison had a full mental competency evaluation done 3 weeks before signing. Everything is legally sound." Of course he did, I thought. Of course he knew exactly what he was doing. That first afternoon, we all pretended to be civilized. We walked together through his estate, this sprawling house that had always felt like a cross between a museum and a storybook to me. His study was at the end of a long hallway, its heavy door carved with intricate patterns he'd once told me were based on Celtic knots. Inside, it felt like stepping into his brain. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, thousands of volumes organized, with a precision that would make librarians weep. Antique globes, display cases filled with mechanical puzzles, and strange little devices that clicked and spun and locked themselves in maddening ways. An enormous oak desk took up the center of the room, scarred with years of use but gleaming under the light from the tall windows. On that desk, like a stage prop, sat a single sheet of paper, where shadows dance but never tire and words hold power none require. The answer waits where stories sleep, but only one may take and keep. We all read it at least twice. Someone breathed. Someone else whispered, "What?" "It's obviously about the library," Derek announced, puffing himself up. "Shadows dancing between the shelves, words holding power. Classic metaphor." "No," my dad snapped. It's the basement. That's where shadows would dance. Wiring down there always flickers. My cousin Tommy, 18 and more interested in sketchbooks than spreadsheets, spoke up quietly. What if it's not metaphorical? What if there are actual shadows dancing somewhere? The adults looked at him like he'd just suggested we use a Ouija board. Tommy had always been the quiet one, a watcher, not a talker. Harrison had loved him for that, always asking about his art, telling him which gallery shows to see. That's actually not a terrible thought, I said, surprising myself. Derek rolled his eyes. This isn't a sci-fi movie, Tommy. We're dealing with an advanced logical puzzle, not ghosts. He then launched into a 10-minute lecture about cryptographic patterns, while everyone else pretended to listen and mentally staked out parts of the house they wanted to search first. Day 1, we had ground rules. We worked together. We made a schedule, divvied up sections of the house, and promised not to move or damage anything without a family vote. We even ordered takeout and ate at the long dining table like some bizarre corporate retreat. By day 3, the rules were a joke. I woke up at 2 in the morning to use the bathroom and saw light flickering outside through my guest room window. When I looked down into the yard, I caught Derek coming in through the side door with a metal detector slung over his shoulder. By the end of that first week, the house wasn't a home anymore. It was a battleground. Derek claimed the dining room as his command center, filling it with whiteboards covered in equations, arrows, and phrases like semantic drift circled 3 times. Mom and Aunt Linda colonized the living room with stacks of printed research, articles about riddles, and spreadsheets tracking potential clue density in each room. Dad and Uncle Brad turned the kitchen into a staging area, hauling in toolboxes, scanners, and equipment none of us knew how to use. Territories were drawn without anyone saying the word, all with the same silent understanding. If you solved it, it was yours. The worst part, though, wasn't the competition. It was watching Harrison's house, the place where he'd been happiest, the place that smelled like coffee and old books and lemon oil, slowly torn apart in the name of finding the answer. His vintage furniture got shoved across floors as people searched for hidden compartments that probably didn't exist. Stack after stack of carefully organized books was pulled down and left in chaotic piles. Glass display cases were opened, their contents handled with frantic, greasy hands. One afternoon, I walked into the library and saw my cousin Emma, practical, tax-obsessed Emma, holding a utility knife over a first edition Dickens. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Checking for hidden pages," she said, like it was obvious. "This book's worth 15 grand. Perfect place to hide something important." "You're destroying it." She shrugged, started slicing through the binding with horrifying precision. "It'll be worth a lot more than 15,000 if there's a clue inside. Besides, once we find the answer, we can afford to replace it." I watched the knife glide through the spine of a book my uncle loved and felt, for the first time, that this wasn't really about $47 million anymore. It was about everything we'd buried, everything we'd resented, everything we'd never said. And this riddle, the last thing Harrison left behind, was pulling all of it into the light. By the end of the first week, the house didn't feel like Harrison's house anymore. It felt like a sinking ship, and every member of my family was clawing desperately at the wood, tearing pieces off in hopes they'd find a treasure map carved underneath. There were alliances, temporary, paranoid alliances, forming and breaking like unstable chemical reactions. Dad and Uncle Brad whispered together in the kitchen, drawing diagrams and hiring a construction crew just to scan support beams. Mom and Aunt Linda murmured theories in the living room, their piles of notes turning into architectural hazards. Even my teenage sister Megan had gotten in on the madness, announcing she would allow people to search her bedroom for hidden clues, for $20 per session. What fascinated me most was how quickly everyone began behaving like we weren't related at all. I'd walk past the dining room and see Derek surrounded by whiteboards full of arrows, scrawled formulas, and what looked like a heat map of the entire house. He'd stopped sleeping, stopped shaving, and started looking at people like they were obstacles instead of blood. He jumped when I stepped into the doorway. "What do you want?" "To ask if you found anything." I kept my voice neutral. "You're wasting time. You're not even contributing. Do you even understand riddles?" His tone was cutting, but beneath it was fear, the thick, metallic kind that clings to the ribs. "It's not a calculus exam, Derek. It's your uncle's house." He laughed, a hollow sound. Uncle Harrison didn't do anything without a deeper layer. He wasn't wrong about that. He was wrong about everything else. As days passed, the house turned into a battlefield of shredded paper, overturned furniture, and broken trust. People moved through the halls like ghosts, tired, suspicious, muttering to themselves, clutching books or gadgets like talismans. At night, the floorboards creaked with secret footsteps. During the day, raised voices cracked through the air like gunshots. The tension finally boiled over when I found Emma hunched over another book with a knife. This time it wasn't Dickens. It was a signed first edition Hemingway. I snatched it from her hands. "Emma, stop!" She glared at me, wild-eyed. There could be a message inside. These books could be worth millions in clues. They're worth thousands in money. We could sell them. And lose the real prize? No way. She snatched it back. Besides, these are replaceable. No, I said quietly. They're not. She paused, just long enough for guilt to flicker over her face. But greed smothered it fast, and she knelt again to slice the spine. I left before I said something I couldn't take back. Later that afternoon, my cousin Jessica, the one who'd always been effortlessly perfect, top of every class, the one people compared me to my whole childhood, confronted me in the hallway. "Give me back my notebook." "What notebook?" "The blue one." Her voice was venomous. "I saw you taking photos of my notes." "I was taking pictures of the riddle, Jessica." "Liar," she hissed. "You've always been jealous that I got better grades." There it was, the truth she'd been waiting 10 years to throw like a knife. I stepped around her. I wasn't playing this game. But the worst shift came not from the adults or even from Derek. It came from Megan. My 17-year-old sister had always been more dramatic than malicious, rolling her eyes at everything, convinced our parents' attention was a currency she didn't have enough of. But this situation turned her sharp. I caught her rifling through my backpack late one night. "Looking for something?" I asked. She didn't even look ashamed. "Everyone else is cheating. Why shouldn't I?" "Because we're family, Megan," I said softly. "We're supposed to trust each other." She let out a laugh I'd never heard from her before. Sharp, brittle, angry. "Family. Jessica hasn't spoken to Emma in a week. Mom is spying on Dad. Dad is threatening to sue Uncle Brad if he touches his territory again. Derek said he'd call the police on anyone who even steps near his laptop. This isn't family, Lila." Her voice cracked. "It's Survivor." She wasn't wrong, and hearing it from her, someone still young enough to see things clearly, felt like a punch. The next morning, I found Grandma Betty crying in her retirement home. Family members had shown up with flowers and fake smiles, trying to pry information out of her. "Harrison told me everything," she said to me as she twisted her tissues. "Told me he didn't trust any of them anymore. Only you, Lila." My chest tightened. Later that night, I stood in Harrison's study alone. I looked around at the chaos, the pulled-out books, the toppled puzzles, the gouges in the wood where someone had tested for hidden compartments. And for the first time, I wondered if Harrison had done this on purpose, not for a clue, not for a game, but for a revelation. This riddle wasn't exposing his fortune, it was exposing us. I ran my fingers across the desk he'd sat at for decades. The wood was smooth in some places, worn in others. Then I felt it. A groove. A tiny, deliberate groove I hadn't noticed before. I pressed on it. Nothing happened. But something whispered at the back of my mind. A secret? A mechanism? A clue? Before I could explore it, the study door slammed open. Derek stood there, eyes bloodshot, breath heavy, a crowbar dangling from his hand. "Step away from the desk," he said. "What?" "I know you found something. I've been watching the security cameras I installed." "You installed us?" "You come in here every night," he said, taking a step forward. "You touch the same spot. You're hiding something." "Derek, I haven't—" "Move." I moved, and he attacked the desk. The crowbar came down again and again, splintering wood, cracking the antique surface, destroying a piece of furniture that had been in Harrison's family for 4 generations. "Derek, stop!" I grabbed his arm, but he shook me off. Wood exploded in chunks. After 20 minutes of senseless destruction, Derek collapsed on the chair, panting. Sweat dripped down his face. Nothing. The desk was ruined, and he'd found nothing. He threw the crowbar across the room. It shattered a glass display case full of antique chess sets. Pieces scattered across the rug like fallen teeth. "This," he spit out, pointing at me, at the broken desk, the scattered pieces, the chaos, "is your fault." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The house fell silent. I knelt beside the shattered desk, brushing away dust. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from sadness. Harrison loved this desk. He'd polished it every week. And then I saw it, where the wood had cracked deepest. A glint. Metal. A shape. Something thin and brass, embedded beneath the ruined surface. My breath caught. The desk hadn't been destroyed, it had been opened. I scraped gently at the wood until I uncovered it. A brass plate engraved with 4 tiny symbols: a crescent moon, an open book, a key, an hourglass. My heart raced. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Panic jolted through me. I brushed wood shavings over the plate, hiding it. Sat back. Pretended to clean. Mom stepped into the room, heels crunching over broken glass. She looked around, eyes softening. "Your uncle used to say," she murmured, running a finger along the spines of his books, "that the best puzzles hide in plain sight." I swallowed. He was right. About everything. After Mom left the study, I waited. I counted slowly, letting my heartbeat settle, listening for footsteps, distant arguments, slammed doors, any sign that someone else might wander in. When the house finally fell into a low, tense buzz of background chaos, I went back to the ruined desk and brushed the wood shavings aside again. There it was, the brass plate. 4 symbols so small you'd miss them unless you were looking. Unless maybe you knew Harrison well enough to notice what wasn't obvious. A crescent moon, an open book, a key, an hourglass. Not random, never random with him. I stared at the symbols until my eyes blurred. The riddle repeated in my mind like a heartbeat. Where shadows dance but never tire, and words hold power none require. The answer waits where stories sleep, but only one may take and keep. Everyone had been focused on shadows and literal hiding places, but the symbols weren't pointing to rooms. They were pointing to ideas, and ideas were something Uncle Harrison funneled into very specific things. Books, journals, his journals. Using the rolling ladder, I climbed toward the top shelves where he kept his personal writings, not part of the cataloged library, but scattered intentionally, like he didn't want anyone but himself touching them. The first one I pulled down was a faded burgundy leather journal from 1987. On the cover, in Harrison's careful, tiny handwriting, was a crescent moon. I opened it. Dreams are where stories sleep. My pulse kicked. 1 symbol matched. I climbed again. Found his old linguistics notebook. He'd kept it during a year abroad after selling his first company. A small key was drawn on the spine. Language is the key to all knowledge. Another match. The third journal, the one with the hourglass, was his private autobiography. Handwritten, never published. I'd seen him writing in it sometimes, sitting on the porch, staring out at the lake. Time reveals all secrets. 3 for 3. But the 4th symbol, the open book, was missing. I checked every journal, every handmade notebook, every spiral-bound pad he'd scribbled in. Nothing. Until I realized it wasn't a book, it was a symbol on the shelf. A carved shape. A small wooden emblem of an open book that Harrison himself had designed into the shelving units years ago. I ran my fingers along the top shelf and found it, hidden in the carved molding, easy to miss unless you knew exactly what to feel for. I pressed it. Click. A soft, mechanical shift sounded behind the shelves, and then part of the bookshelf swung inward like a door. A hidden room. A real one. I stepped inside. It was a walk-in, closet-sized chamber, dimly lit by a single bulb overhead, its walls lined with photos, Harrison at different ages, smiling with cousins, siblings, colleagues. Drawings from when we were children, tickets from plays, notes he'd written to himself, memories he never showed anyone else. And in the center, a small wooden desk, a single drawer, a brass key taped to the top. My throat tightened. Why me? Why had he trusted me with this? Had he known I'd find it? Had he wanted me to? Hands trembling, I peeled the tape off the key and slid it into the drawer. It turned easily, smooth, like it had been oiled recently. Inside was a manila envelope. On top of it, a letter. My name on the outside, Lila, in his handwriting. I read it slowly, carefully. Every line felt heavy. Congratulations. You solved the riddle, not through brute force or expensive consultants, but by remembering who I really was. This was never about cryptography. It was about understanding me. Inside this envelope is account information for a trust I established 6 months ago. Everything I own is inside it. The fortune is yours, but only if you accept my conditions. Read them carefully, and remember, wealth tests people more than poverty does. I trust you to make the right choice. Harrison. I stared at the envelope, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I opened it. Inside were a series of documents and typed conditions. Simple, brutal. Unmistakably Harrison. $1 million must be used to establish college funds for every family member under 18. $5 million must be donated to literacy programs within 1 year. The remaining $41 million becomes mine only if I permanently cut ties with any family member who damaged his house during the search. If I reject any condition, everything goes to charity. Deadline, 24 hours. I stood there, surrounded by his memories, feeling the weight of the choice settling onto me like a lead blanket. Cut ties with my family, forever. If I walked out of this room and accepted the conditions, it meant goodbye, not just passive distance, legal, permanent, irreversible distance. No calls, no visits, no holidays, no second chances. But walking through the house that week, watching them tear apart everything he loved, watching them tear apart each other, the yelling, the accusations, the spying, the alliances, the breaking of alliances, hadn't they already cut ties with what family meant? Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the hidden chamber. I closed the drawer, closed the bookshelf door, and hid the envelope inside my jacket. When I stepped out into the kitchen, chaos was exploding like a supernova. My dad was shouting at Derek. Derek was shouting at Uncle Brad. Mom was crying. Emma was slicing another book open. Aunt Linda was on the phone with someone whispering frantically about contesting the will. Grad students were arguing over whether the cipher shift pattern in Harrison's notes meant something. My teenage cousins were filming parts of the argument for TikTok. It was a circus, a war, an unraveling. And suddenly, everything inside me snapped into place, not like breaking, but like a puzzle piece finally clicking. I stepped into the center of the kitchen and raised the envelope. "I found it," I said. The room froze. Every face whipped toward me, and every unsaid fear, every buried resentment, every ounce of greed sharpened in the silence. "Where?" Derek demanded, voice ragged. "In the study," I said, "behind the bookshelf, in a hidden chamber." My dad stepped forward. "What does it say? How much do we each get? Are there shares? Equal distribution?" "No," I said, "there are conditions." I unfolded the papers, took a breath, read them out loud. When I finished, the silence wasn't quiet, it was suffocating. Then my mother whispered the question, sitting in every mind in the room. "So, you have to choose." Her eyes trembled. "Us, or the money." The room closed in around me. The envelope felt heavier than any fortune. But I was no longer 16-year-old Lila craving their approval. I was the only person Harrison trusted to understand the truth. This was never about money. It was about seeing people clearly. And they were finally seeing themselves. I didn't answer my mother's question. Not right away. I just stood there holding the envelope, feeling the weight of $47 million pressed against my ribs, like a second heartbeat. Everyone stared at me, waiting, panicking, calculating. I could see it in their faces. Dad wondering if he could negotiate. Mom trying to soften her expression, make herself look injured and innocent. Derek vibrating with desperation. Emma frozen in guilt beside the half-destroyed poetry anthology. Tommy, the only one whose eyes still looked human, worried rather than greedy. It was the quietest the house had been since the will was read. Then Dad stepped closer. "Lila," he said, trying for paternal warmth, "you don't have to decide now. Let's talk privately, as a family." A family. Funny word choice from a man who had screamed 2 days ago that he'd sue his own brother for touching his section of the attic. "We deserve a chance," Mom whispered. "Your uncle can't expect you to—" "Yes," I said suddenly. Her voice caught. "Yes, what?" "Yes, he expected me to make a choice." I slipped the papers back into the envelope. Everyone leaned forward like I'd just cradled a bomb. "But I'm not choosing between the money and you," I said. "I'm choosing something else." Confusion rippled across the room. It was almost comical, how greed and fear can make even intelligent people forget what's obvious. "I'm taking the inheritance," I said plainly. "All of it." Derek lurched forward. "You can't—" "But," I continued, raising my voice slightly, "I'm also suing every single person who damaged this property." The room exploded again. Shouting, pleading, threats, half-formed arguments, my mother gasping like I'd slapped her. I lifted my hand. Silence fell instantly. "Unless," I said, "you agree to my terms." Every pair of eyes locked on me like I'd gone nuclear. Good. Let them see exactly what Harrison meant when he said puzzles reveal people. "Here's how this is going to work," I said. "The money stays with me, but it won't just sit in an account with my name on it. I'm creating the Harrison Family Foundation, and every adult in this family will receive a guaranteed annual income of $50,000. A stunned silence. After days of desperation, caution began to replace panic. 50,000, Emma whispered. Each? Yes. But that's more than enough to live, I said. Not enough to stop working. Not enough to ruin anyone's life. And enough to make sure no one here ever has to tear apart someone's home again to survive. Mom sank into a chair. Dad rubbed his temples. Derek's breathing steadied for the first time in days. But I wasn't finished. The children, I added, get full college funds, tuition, housing, living expenses, whatever they need. No more student debt. No more choosing between education and survival. Even Tommy exhaled at that, relief softening his shoulders. 10 million goes to literacy programs, I said, just like Harrison wanted. 5 million will be reserved for true emergencies, medical, natural disasters, things that actually matter. The rest gets invested, carefully, sustainably. My father's eyes narrowed. And what's the catch? Here it was, the real puzzle piece. The one Harrison left for me, not written in ink, but in experience. The catch, I said, is behavior. A ripple of tension. If you commit a crime more serious than a speeding ticket, your annual payment is suspended for a year. Dad flinched. Mom's mouth drew tight. If you bully, threaten, manipulate, or emotionally attack another family member at our weekly dinner, you lose a month of payments. Weekly dinner? Aunt Linda squeaked. Yes, I said, every Sunday. One meal. All of us. No phones, no scheming, no talk of money, just being human. And who decides what counts as bullying? Jessica asked, eyebrows arched skeptically. We do, I said, as a group, by majority vote, kids over 16 included. And if someone refuses to participate? Uncle Brad asked cautiously. They're out permanently, I said. I let that land. It landed hard. Derek was the first to speak. His voice cracked. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for what I did to the desk, for all of it. He looked at me, not like I was a rival, but like I was the only lifeline he had left. Mom swallowed. I hired an investigator to follow your father, she confessed, voice shaking. I thought he was hiding clues from me. I'm sorry. Dad exhaled. I did hide something, he said. I hired a construction crew behind everyone's backs. I should have told you. Emma set the utility knife aside like it was a weapon she finally realized she'd been holding. I shouldn't have destroyed his books, she whispered. One by one, awkward, stiff, even angry at times, they all apologized. Every single one of them. It took an hour, maybe longer. When they were done, the house felt different. Not healed, not okay, but possible. Now, I said, we vote on the foundation. It passed, unanimously. Derek abstained, but not out of resentment, out of fear. I need time, he told me quietly after everyone left. I need to know I can be someone worthy of this second chance. You have until Sunday, I said. He nodded. 3 days later, he showed up at my apartment with a bottle of wine and a resignation letter from the tech support call center he'd been trapped in. I'm going back to MIT, he said. I'm finishing my degree. I want to build something that helps people, not destroys them. It was the first real smile I'd seen on his face in years. The first Sunday dinner was awkward. No one knew where to sit. No one knew what to talk about. Someone brought a fruit platter. Someone else brought bread pudding. Tommy brought a card game because he didn't know what else to do with his hands. We ate in clumsy silence, like relearning how to be human again. By the fifth dinner, people were laughing, sharing stories, helping each other carry plates, throwing olives at Derek when he made a bad joke. It felt fragile, but real. 6 months later, we stood together outside Harrison's estate, selling the house to a couple who loved its history, but knew nothing about the riddle the walls had witnessed. A dealer paid $12,000 for Harrison's desk. He didn't know there was a brass plate hidden under the wood. I didn't tell him. Some secrets belonged to the person who found them. Years passed. The foundation grew. College funds were distributed. Emergency medical bills were paid. One cousin survived leukemia because the fund paid for treatment insurance wouldn't cover. The family stayed together, not perfectly, not magically, but intentionally. Week after week, dinner after dinner. At our 5th anniversary Sunday dinner, Derek lifted his glass. To Harrison, he said, for giving us the riddle we needed, not the one we deserved. We all raised our glasses. And as I looked around the table at this flawed, fractured, rebuilt family, I realized something. The real answer to the riddle had never been hidden in the desk or the bookshelves or the walls. It had been here, in this room, in these people, in the possibility of choosing love over greed. Harrison knew us better than we knew ourselves, and he left us the only treasure worth solving a riddle for, each other.